Hello and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today our video review is, at least in terms of its subject matter, something of a crossover. We could argue that the two teas I'm looking at today are both dark teas, Korean dark teas, but the vendor, O5 Tea Bar, makes the point that just as easily they can be regarded as oolongs. So let's get into what we're looking at, then we might explain very briefly why there is this sort of overlap. What we're looking at are two examples of Balhyocha, which we've looked at before. And the defining characteristic of a Balhyocha tea is that it's oxidized and there's also a degree of fermentation. That makes it stand out from a more straightforward, shall we say, dark tea that we've already looked at, which would be the Hookcha, which is the Korean Jeju tea that we've already reviewed. The reason why this can be considered an oolong is that it's not fully oxidized. That doesn't mean to say it's anywhere near a green oolong, obviously, and there's certainly room for the controlling the extent to which such a tea is oxidized. And so I can see the point in saying, despite that aspect of fermentation, which isn't sort of dark tea level in the first place, it can just as easily be seen that this is a special case of oolong. So what we have on the one hand is the Balhyocha Saebyok, probably mangling the pronunciation, and the Balhyocha Noeul. And the Saebyok is a fruitier twist. It's heavily oxidized oolong, rich in depth in sweetness. And the Balhyocha Noeul is full-bodied, roasted and baked. And that adds distinct notes of cacao, charred wood and a natural sweetness. So one of them, what's being emphasized is the level of oxidation, and the other one, what's being added to it, what's being played around with, is the degree of roasting. So I'm very much looking forward to treating both of these teas in a Western style of brew, although I suppose we should call it a Korean brew style of brewing. But first we're going to take a look at the packaging, which I don't always do, especially for standard packagings. But it'd be good to see just how much information O5 Tea Bar present, and then we'll take a look at the teas inside. So back in a mo. So here we are looking at the packaging for our Balhyocha Noeul. What I've done here is I've focused the camera on the lower part of the label, which is where we have the variation, of course, depending on the particular kind of tea and its name. So you'll note at the top here, it denotes that it's an oolong, the name, and then some very basic flavor profile notes, plus some indications of what makes this a distinctive kind of oolong, especially when regarded as a pair of teas. We have there the location in Korea. I am in no way going to try and pronounce that word. And we also have a latitude and longitude. We've then got some details about the producer of this tea. And then right at the bottom, well, not quite at the bottom, just before we get to the brewing parameters, is the point that each micro batch of tea is hand processed. Therefore, we're not really making a kind of standard product. I'm sure it varies from year to year, but also more than that, simply from one batch of tea, quite literally, to the next. The brewing parameters are 4 grams to 240 mils of water at 85 for 60 seconds, and it's a 40 gram package. So let's take a quick look at the other one. So here we are looking at the Balhyocha Saebyok. This one is a fruitier twist, and this is the heavily oxidized oolong. I should imagine that all of these Balhyochas are fairly heavily oxidized anyway, simply because of the extra oxidizing time thanks to the fermentation. We have all of the same kinds of details again. We've got the basic flavor profile notes and what makes it a distinctive kind of oolong, especially regarding the other one of the pair. The location, once again, I'm not going to say that. Details about the grower and producer and the fact that it's a micro batch. And the brewing parameters are the same between the two teas, 4 grams, 240 mils, 85 degrees centigrade for 60 seconds. So let's get on and look at the tea leaves. Back in a mo. So here we are looking at the tea inside the Balhyocha packaging. This is a close-up of the leaves for the Balhyocha Saebyok, which is the heavily oxidized version. The smell of the leaves reminds me very much of dark chocolate, with a little bit of the extra bitterness that comes from dark chocolate. Now it's interesting because it's the other one that says there are cacao notes, but certainly on the dry leaf, this is a mixture of bittersweet with a definite sort of slightly chocolatey quality. The leaf itself is pretty small, pretty intact as well. Very withered and very dark, uniformly brown. But unlike other versions of this, you can kind of see that these are processed, fermented, withered leaves. They haven't fragmented as far as I can tell. So I'm just going to swing this round. And we are now going to be looking at the Noeul version. This is the one where there's more of an emphasis on the cacao, and that is the more roasted and baked one, or at least the emphasis is on that. The leaves themselves look much the same. There are one or two pieces that might be slightly bigger, but in general terms, it's much the same. Ironically, this one has a much more sweet chocolatey smell. I'm reminded of drinking chocolate powder. I won't say a particular brand, but you know what I mean. And it's like the dry chocolate drinking powder. So there we go. That's a close-up of the leaves. I'm very much looking forward to moving on to brewing them. See you in a mo. Hello and welcome to the final part of our video where we compare and contrast these two oolongs, technically Balhyochas, but oolong seems to be an appropriate term given the emphasis is on levels of oxidation and degrees of baking, which is fairly standard considerations when it comes to oolongs. On my left, once again, I have the Balhyocha Saebyok, where the emphasis is on heavy oxidation. And on my right, the Balhyocha Noeul, where the emphasis is on roasting and baking. Colour-wise, I would say the teas are similar. This one's got more water in it somehow, so that might explain any kind of colour differences, but they look like moderately brewed black tea, I suppose you would say, but with a hint of an extra kind of orange quality that I wouldn't usually find in a black tea or red tea, depending on which part of the world you're from. The more heavily oxidized one, there's a store cupboard dried fruit quality to it. Yeah, and I can tell why this one, the emphasis is on what roasting and baking does. There's an upfront sort of roasted note to that, which there isn't in this one. From a little distance, you can still pick up behind that element of fermentation. So it's not a black tea, but you can tell what the greater oxidation and the roasting has done to lift it out of what we've experienced before in the way of this mild fermentation aspect. So let's try the taste of the Saebyok. Reminder, the emphasis here is on degrees of oxidation. It's very smooth. The fermentation gives it a little tang. It's sweet, and it's a lingering flavour. Yeah, there's fruit. Now, once you just let it settle in your palate, it's definitely a kind of fruity aspect to it. It could maybe stand to be 5 degrees hotter. Or, yes, I wouldn't want to brew it for longer, but as much as the flavour is lingering, I feel as if it could somehow be a little more intense, but it's incredibly smooth, and the fruit is there, and the fermentation is there, and they all work together incredibly well. Let's try the one with the emphasis is on roasting and baking. It's hard to tell. There's a kind of savoury note. That's what's really coming off. It's true, there's less fruit, and that baking quality is definitely there. I think they're spot on with a kind of cocoa cacao note. It's a little, not tangier, but it's a little... If this one is really big on smoothness, this one, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's tannins or something, but this one, it must be that it'll be the bitterness from the roasting, not bitterness as in astringent or anything like that, but that baking quality. Rather than adding the kind of sweetness that it often does, it's more like a charcoal roasting effect. It adds a little bit of bitterness that really does change the flavor profile. So this one is smooth and very much to do with fruit. This one has the same sort of mild fermentation taste in the background. We've experienced that before, but that element of baking, rather than adding sweetness to it, has added sort of a charcoal roasting bitterness. Both highly enjoyable and both distinctive for all that. Now, in terms of our usual 3-point review, well, they were both easy to brew. I just follow the parameters. I would say they're spot on in both. They're both the same. It's possible to push them maybe another 30 seconds or a little bit hotter, but given how smooth this one is, and given that this is just that tickle of bitterness that adds an extra dimension to it, it might well be that you would spoil it. You'd be pushing it over the edge one way or the other. Are they easy to get hold of? Well, these aren't the only Balhyochas that we've tried, but these are the only ones where they've been treated straight up as oolongs. So we're playing with oxidation and we're playing with baking, and I find that a more interesting set of distinctions. On the other hand, as is always the case with 05 T-bar teas, I've had no problem getting them all the way from Canada. Now I'm in the UK. Wherever you might find these, I would, of course, as a matter of courtesy, for my part, urge you to consider getting them from 05 T-bar, because that's the variation or the vendor I've been using. But they're really interesting teas. They're very enjoyable. They're easy to brew, and Balhyochas seem to be, despite being quite a niche thing, it's a niche tea within Korean tea, let alone anywhere else. If you think of it as a distinctive kind of oolong, I think you will get a lot out of this, especially if you like collecting and trying different oolongs. So a hearty recommendation from me on both fronts, and it remains for me only to say happy steeping and God bless.